Well, Kadiza Sultana and the two girls she travelled with all came from East London. Roshanara Ali, the Labour MP for Bethnal Green and Bow, is with us in the studio, as is Sara Khan, co-founder of the counter-extremism organisation Inspire and author of a new book on British Islam. Good morning to you both.
Good morning.
Sara Khan, she may have been a promising young woman, but if she had returned to this country, she might well have been prosecuted, mightn't she?
Well, I think what we understand is that it's a case-by-case scenario. We know that when she went, she was 16 years old. And, I think it's very important that we treat children very differently to adults. She, by default, was vulnerable. She was groomed online, very similar to sexual grooming online. So we don't really know what would have happened in her situation had she returned. But I think we do know that it would have been a case-by-case scenario.
Do you see her as a victim?
I do see her as a victim because she's not an adult. I've come across numerous cases of young girls as young as the age of 13, who have been radicalised online or within communities, what you find is with many of these young girls in particular, and the research that I've done in my book, is that many of these young girls hold a very extreme understanding of religion, or worse still, they have a void in a genuine good understanding of Islam. They lack critical thinking skills, and that actually is what makes them vulnerable to Islamist extremist propaganda in particular. And so in one sense, she is a victim because girls like that find that they are not receiving counter messages. They're not hearing about an Islam, for example, that promotes, pluralism, human rights, democracy. And this is very much why I advocate the idea of a British Islam, which challenges and rebuts Islamist ideology.
OK, we'll come back to that in a moment. But Roshanara Ali, from what you know of the community, why do you think she and her friends wanted to go to Syria?
Well, I think I agree with Sara that there are big challenges across the country about making sure that our young people are taught about Islam in a British context, in a Western context, and taught how to negotiate their faith with living in a Western secular democracy. And sometimes extremist ideologies can take root by particular people who try and exploit young people's vulnerabilities. And that certainly seems to have been the case here, particularly with the use of online grooming.
But these were not unintelligent young women, were they? They were doing very well in school. They were not at all no-hopers with no prospects in this country.
Well, that's why this case, these cases were so shocking, because I know that certainly I felt, and I know others did, that it could have been, anybody's child, and that's what's so shocking about it. That this is they came from loving families. They were highly articulate, highly intelligent, promising young women. I met some of the people who taught them. They had very high hopes for them, and along the way something went badly wrong. And there has been much soul searching, and that needs to continue. And we need to learn the lessons in making so that we can protect other young people from being targeted in this way and driven to extremism.
Sara Khan, in the case of Kadiza Sultana, she has lost her life in Syria, which was, not an unpredictable consequence of going to a war zone in the first place. Is it the ultimate deterrent, do you think? Are there fewer young British citizens going to Syria today than there were?
I think compared to last year, there are. But I know there have been many cases of young people who've been very much attracted and attempted to try and leave the UK to join ISIS. And I think this is much more of a wider problem. It's not necessarily about those people that are going to join Syria. If you look at what Daesh propaganda is saying now, they're not actually encouraging travel to the UK. Now they're actively saying, commit atrocities in the countries that you're living in. So the message has changed. And we know that there have been several attempts of young British Muslims attempting to commit acts of terror in London, in the UK. So the message has changed. And we're seeing that again in Paris, France, and other places as well. And that propaganda is reaching thousands of young Muslims. And I think we underestimate the extent, the reach, the influence of Daesh propaganda. There was a report out just a few weeks ago showing how there are hundreds of thousands of extremist websites online masquerading themselves as normative Islam. And if you as a young Muslim have a very poor understanding or a deficient understanding of Islam or a superficial understanding of Islam, it doesn't matter if you have A grades. If you lack critical skills, importantly, and you think that what you're reading online is normative Islam, if you don't have a good relationship with mosques or you feel distant from there, these young people are going to be vulnerable to extremist propaganda online.
And the question then, Roshan Arali, is how the authorities deal with that. And the way they are dealing with it and have dealt with it is through the counter-extremism programme PREVENT, which is regarded with a lot of suspicion in the Muslim community, if not downright antagonism. So how can you address that? How can you try and bridge that gap?
Well, the most important thing is that the agencies nationally as well as locally need to work closely with the community and work to build trust.
But
that's easy said than done.
Yeah, where they don't want to have anything to do with
Well, it's not the case that they don't at all, but they do have, many have concerns about how PREVENT is being implemented, concerns about young Muslims being stigmatised. And there is a balance that has to be struck to protect young people, to prevent them from being radicalised, but also making sure that teachers and other agencies have the proper advice, the training and support
Do you support PREVENT?
The legislation appropriately. I have deep concerns about how that legislation impacts on communities. And what I called for last year after the 3 girls went to Syria was a proper inquiry to learn the lessons of why they got radicalised, where the failings were among agencies, but also what the community needs to do across, in different parts of the country. There are different experiences. We need to learn and learn from what's happened with the 3 girls and make sure that those lessons are learned. And that requires joint working. It's very important that if we want to tackle extremism, that we treat this issue as a national issue that concerns and affects all communities. Of course, the Muslim community needs to be at the forefront. That is recognised, but the agencies need to play a stronger role and they need to be supported to do that well and appropriately.
But you are not able to say today, I support PREVENT.
I have, as I said, I have huge concerns about some of the ways in which it's implemented. Some of it can be quite misguided, and what the government needs to do is do a proper assessment of what's working and what's not, and they need to listen to the Muslim community who want to make sure that the dangers that particularly the Muslim community themselves and their children face, but also non-Muslims whose children are being targeted by extremists. They need the protection, but that requires partnership between communities.
Do they need to listen more to the Muslim community, Sara Khan, or do they just need to crack on? Because the way you're describing the danger, it appears to be more acute and more of a threat, even if we're not seeing people travel to Syria and Iraq in the same numbers.
I think we have to be very careful about the assumptions we make about PREVENT. A lot of the work that my organisation has done, we have engaged with many Muslim organisations, many Muslim women, many Muslim families who absolutely support PREVENT, who have referred their own children to Channel. We don't hear of those Muslim voices. Sometimes we hear the loudest Muslim voices who are fundamentally opposed to PREVENT. Many of them are also Islamist groups in this country who oppose PREVENT. And let's be very clear, there are factual untruths and myths being peddled about PREVENT, that PREVENT is about spying, it's about closing down debate and discussion in class, it's about criminalising Muslims who wear hijabs or who grow beards. This is completely and factually untrue, and there's nothing in the PREVENT strategy that advocates this or in the Channel guidance.
Just to take one of those, spying, for example, I mean, it may be that a referral sparks some kind of surveillance.
Well, but PREVENT operates in the pre-criminal space. Surveillance would only operate under Pursue, which is another arm of the government's contest counter-terrorism strategy. But another key point here is that I know many Muslim parents who are incredibly grateful for the support of PREVENT. I mean, in the book that I've written, The Battle for British Islam, I highlight the case of a 13-year-old girl who has received intervention from a channel provider who absolutely was very clear her attempt of trying to join ISIS. And she has written a poem talking about how she feels PREVENT has saved her from joining ISIS, and her parents are incredibly grateful. So I think we've got to make sure we don't take a wide assuming position that all Muslims in this country oppose PREVENT, because that's just not true.
Roshan Arali, are you not more able to support it from what you've heard?
There are sub-aspects of the legislation that is helpful, and what support is being given to communities and agencies is welcome. What needs to happen is that where there is distrust, there is myth and misunderstanding that has to be addressed, and that is very commonplace, where parents won't go and pick up the helpline because they're worried about being criminalised, and we have to address those.